welcome to the AT&T CyberThreat Report for May 10th, 2012. Today we have Jim Clausing joining us. Jim is a key malware analyst on our team. He is involved with some of the outside community as well. Welcome, Jim, and what do you plan to talk about today?
Well, Brian, this was a really big week for updates and patches, and I'm not going to talk about a whole lot of them, but I did want to talk about a couple, especially some that came from Apple, and then also an update on the report that we did back in March. So,
all right, great. That should be some good discussion. I think it's important that we include the context of Apple and other platforms in our patch discussion, so that should be some good topic. We also have John Hogoboom joining us today. John is one of our analysts, and he's been working a little bit on the malware spam activity, and also has some other, life-changing activities. Can I ask you about that, John?
You can. I don't know if it's relevant to the CyberThreat report, but yes, I did just get married last weekend, so that was 2 weeks ago. That's why I been out missing a couple of programs here for the past couple of weeks.
Well, welcome back. We appreciate you joining us, and congratulations on that.
All right, thank you.
I'm Brian Rexroad. I'll cover the internet weather today. And as we go into this, I want to just make a mention here. There has been an increase. We've been observing this trend over some time now in what we call SMS Spam, or that's short messaging service that is basically mobile spam messaging. And so it's a growing problem. We are working on that to address it. And one thing that we'd like to at least offer as a suggestion is there is a capability, a short code, where you can forward messages that you receive that you interpret as spam. That short code is 7726. It's the same as spelling out spam if you do it on a typical phone keypad. You can forward the message to that, and that will go into an analysis activity that is to identify sources of spamming activity, and it is used to block that activity. So we encourage you to use that code. That's 7726. And share it with your friends and family and everybody so that they will be able to do that. And that is not an AT&T specific thing. That should apply to any short messaging service provider or mobility messaging provider. And with that, we are expecting to have Alex Babatek join us next week. Alex is very much entrenched in messaging abuse activities, specifically for mobility at AT&T. And he's also involved in some community activities, specifically the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group, which has also made some changes as well recently. So we will have Alex with us next week to talk about those topics. And with that, let's go ahead and pass the baton to Jim here, and let's talk a little bit about the Apple updates.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, as I said, it's busy update week. Apple pushed updates to iOS on Monday. Tuesday was Microsoft's regular monthly patching and Adobe's regular monthly patching. So I haven't even managed to work my way through all the updates and all of those, so I don't have a report on Microsoft and Adobe this week. But I did want to talk about the iOS update that they pushed on Monday. In particular, it was a security update, updated iOS to version 5.1.1, and that's the way you can check on your mobile device if you didn't notice being prompted for the update. In fact, if you're running 5.1.1, you got these security updates. They primarily updated two things. They updated Safari, which is Apple's web browser, and WebKit, which is the rendering engine that works behind Safari. And the big thing was there were a couple of vulnerabilities that were discovered. In WebKit, there was one in particular that I think we may have even mentioned briefly, discovered back in March. I should point out, WebKit is used as a rendering engine not just in Safari, but also in Google Chrome and in some other web browsers. It's an alternate to the I don't remember what the Mozilla engine is that runs under Firefox, but so it's one of the open source rendering engines that empower various web browsers. Anyway, there was a relatively serious cross-site scripting vulnerability that was discovered back in March in WebKit that Apple, Google put a workaround in Chrome for this back in March, but Apple is just getting around to pushing this out to the iOS devices this week. It's also a vulnerability that appears to still exist in OS X, and I'm not sure when that update is going to come. Hopefully that'll be soon too. But that's the big thing, the big update that was in this. It opened up basically it opened up your mobile device to be used in cross-site scripting type attacks, click fraud, that kind of stuff.
So, Jim, do you know if there are known exploits that are being exercised against this, or what is the situation relative to exploits, you know?
I'm not sure that the exploits are very widespread, but the guy who discovered it demoed it at a conference in March, and so I'm pretty sure that the proof of concept code was out there. Mm-hmm. So it's something that you want to update relatively soon, because if they're not using it yet, they will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty significant, and that is that there are a lot of theoretical vulnerabilities that exist, but this is a case that, as I understand it, it had been demonstrated actually at the CanSec West security conference, and that, you know, when you're able to demonstrate an exploit against a vulnerability that, in my mind, is more serious than sort of that theoretical description.
Yeah, and it was demoed in March, so the bad guys, even if they hadn't had their hands on the code, they've known about it and been able to, you know, look for it themselves for 3 months, or the better part of, you know, at least 2 months anyway.
Right, and in that sense, that's yet another example of the situation that I think Dave Gross had talked about a couple of weeks ago, which was the notion of this lag time, that is the toolkits that get incorporated into devices or platforms, operating systems or browsers or tools, you name it. When the toolkits are incorporated, if an exploit, or I should say more specifically, if a vulnerability is identified in those, there is a lag time, and sometimes months or years, before the fixes actually get into the system. So we need to be cognizant of that and sensitive to, you know, sort of the defense in depth, and hopefully have some workarounds before that can come.
Right, and that's one of the things. I'm not aware of any workarounds for these particular vulnerabilities. I'd have to do some more research, but I don't remember any. So, you know, when the updates show up on your device, make sure you install them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other issue that I wanted to talk about, which was also Apple-related, is a story that hit a number of places. I saw it on the Macworld website about a vulnerability in current version of OS X, 10.7.3, that would leave unencrypted passwords on the system if you were using File Vault 1. Now, I have mixed feelings about even bringing this up, because to some extent I think the number of folks who are at risk is probably relatively small. The issue is, in order to be vulnerable to this, you had to have used an OS prior to Lion 10.7.3 and File Vault 1, and then upgraded to the latest to 10.7.3, but did not at the same time, when you were prompted, upgrade File Vault from version 1 to version 2. File Vault version 2 does whole disk encryption, and version 1 only encrypted the user's home directories that were selected for it. And so I suspect that there aren't a lot of people that didn't, in the process, upgrade to File Vault 2. So I'm not sure how many people are necessarily vulnerable to it, but if you didn't do it, then you have plain text passwords stored on the disk that are world readable. And basically, the only solution, the only workarounds for the problem, the only fixes are to change your password every time you log out, or to upgrade to File Vault 2. My understanding is that there will be a patch coming from Apple that will some workaround for this that will potentially protect those passwords. But right now, there isn't. This problem has actually been there for some months now. It just hit the press this week, and so I figured it was worth mentioning here.
Yeah, sure. Even though this is a little bit of a special situation, I guess, can you help me understand a little bit better I'm struggling with the relationship between the File Vault and the passwords here.
But this is the password.
Go ahead.
This is the password that decrypts the home directory. Okay. And it gets left in the clear, and it's, yeah.
Okay, so obviously a little bit of a flaw there that hopefully will get straightened out soon, and certainly for folks that are sensitive to the protection of the through encryption of their files, this will be something they'll want to pay attention to.
No. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and just real quick, we had talked about back in March, Microsoft's patches, MS12-020, RDP vulnerability that had been marked critical. The exploit code had been accidentally released. As I knew it would at the time, I think I even mentioned it at the time, with the exploit code out there, it's only a matter of time before it makes it into Metasploit. And this week there was a Metasploit module published that exploits this particular vulnerability. So hopefully you've all got your automatic updates turned on your home machines, or your corporate patching policy has already pushed all of March's patches, and you're not vulnerable to this. But exploit is now available for anybody. It's in Metasploit. So
I think that's pertinent because we are going to talk again about RDP a little bit later and activity we're seeing on the network related to that. So let's make a note of that, and we'll perhaps have a little more discussion on this topic as we go further.
Okay.
All right, great. Thanks very much, Jim. And let's go ahead and move over. Hope I didn't steal any thunder from you, John. And welcome back again. What's happening in the malware spam space?
Yeah, so we haven't actually covered this in quite a while. It's a little bit tedious for me to put this report together. I'm trying to automate it more. However, it's good to go over. There's some some old stories that we've seen before and some possibly new things we haven't seen before, which I'm going to touch upon. So this is the colloquial spam report, also known as the unsolicited bulk email report. These are spam emails that we collect in spam probe accounts, which are basically accounts that we've set up on our various ATT.net and BellSouth.net email services. And they're not real email accounts, so if they receive any email, it's unsolicited because they're not real user email accounts.
Right. There's no subscriber associated with these particular accounts, but they reside within our sort of commercial or consumer email space, so to speak.
Right. So if anybody finds them and sends email to them, it's unsolicited, probably not wanted. And we have many of these accounts. So what we saw is here's the kind of summary report. And I've broken it into two kinds of sections here. So, well, first of all, the total number of emails we saw is actually 1.4 million. That's up a bit from what we had seen previously. I'm not sure why that is exactly, but it's more than we usually see. We're usually seeing around the 800,000 mark, so it's, it's quite a bit more than we see in a 7-day cycle than we usually do.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to, I think we may have added some more accounts to this. I'm not sure if those are included as a part of this, but that may be an explanation for
Oh, actually, that's probably the cause, so that's a good point. I had forgotten that change had been made. In any event, breaking it down into a little bit further, there's two types of spams I kind of consider here. There's ones without attachments and ones with attachments. So in the without attachments category, we kind of break that into two subcategories, ones that we just can't really determine what it is. It's some kind of spam. It could be a phish. It could be a 419 kind of scam or just some other indeterminable type of spam. Most of the emails we see fall into that category, about 1.39 million. And then of the ones that we saw that did not have attachments, inside there, there were about 312 or so that had suspicious or potentially malicious links. We're going to take a look at a few of those in a second here later on. Those are ones where you look at the email, it's text, and it might have some kind of link or URL inside that's kind of trying to entice you to click on it, and that might infect you. And then with the category of with attachments, we had about 24,000 spams with attachments inside. Only about 5,191. About 6,000 of those were actually unique attachments. In terms of spams with blocked malicious attachments, 253 were, not a very high percentage, and 316 slipped through that we're pretty sure are malicious. So the other categories of these 24,000 are they're attachments. We can't really determine if they're malicious or not. They may or may not be. They're probably just other types of things. When we look at the actual breakdown here, we see a lot of those are .doc format or .rtf format, more .doc. Those would be categorized as that, probably not malicious. Doesn't necessarily mean it isn't. We know that there are vulnerabilities in the Office doc format that people could exploit in order to infect you. But we didn't do a hard analysis of all these to make sure that they weren't. A lot of times these are 419 scams, though, or other types of phishing scams. Then we see Zip rounds out the next one. A lot of times there is malicious content inside Zips. Frequently we see EXEs wrapped inside there, and they try to hide the executable by bundling in a zip. PDF, sometimes there's malicious PDFs, but more often than not, these are more usually the 419 scams. And then we've got the EXEs, which are usually malicious almost all the time, and especially when we're talking about these emails that are unsolicited. And then there's, rounding out, we have a bunch of other types, Excel, PowerPoint. I forget what .puz is. That's an interesting one. .scr, that's definitely malicious. That's a scripting file. And then there's some other Excel macro ones that kind of round out that grouping.
Hey, John, 419. Can you remind me what that refers to?
Oh, so 419 scams are the ones that are kind of sourced out of Africa, usually. and they're usually purporting that you have inherited some large sum of money, and they're trying to coerce you into providing them with your bank routing number or something of that nature. It's a long classic phishing scam, but it's very interactive. They're usually a real person on the other end, that you could converse with about this money and trying to coerce you to get your information. I think a lot of them come out of Nigeria, and it's been a problem. They've codenamed them 419. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the general spam, these ones that we can't figure out, a lot of the same things we always see. A lot of these are just regular types of spam that probably aren't malicious. They're just trying to advertise or sell you something, protect against bed bugs, banks trying to loan you money, get cash with no credit, various things like that. We see this regularly in this report. In terms of the ones that are the emails that we saw with suspicious or potentially malicious links, this is just the top few here. There are lots of the smaller numbers down lower here. But what I wanted to point out, there are a couple of interesting ones here. Here's one that's interesting. I'm going to change my color. This one right here that ends in GEPJ.exe. That's actually, we've talked about this on previous programs. It's not rendering here properly, but it uses a right-to-left bit that they can toggle in the file name. And if you were to view this on your computer, it would actually reverse those characters, so it would actually look like exe.jpg when you looked at it, because they put that right-to-left shift bit in there in order to trick you in the file name. So it looks like it ends in .jpg instead of .exe, but in reality, to the system, it's a .exe. That's definitely a malicious one in here. We saw a bunch of those hosted up here. It's a FedEx-based spam. One of the other ones that was interesting is this LABG lovers one that we saw a horde of these, actually, with lots and lots and lots of links inside to malicious malware. We're going to take a closer look at that one. And then there's a bunch of other various ones in here. E-greetings, that's a very common thing that we see. Some of these other ones, there might be a false positive with this one. I'm not quite sure if that's really malicious or not. But a lot of these other ones very likely are. Mm-hmm. Moving on to the types of emails that we saw that actually had attachments in them, here's what got stripped out. So we saw a big run in the past 7 days of Zbot, which is Zeus, and Dromaden ones, which we have seen a lot before. That's a dropper. Dromaden's a downloader that's going to download something else as part of it once you run it. The Zeus one, I think we might have I don't know if I have the actual messages that are in there. But these two are the largest categories, and there were a couple others that fell into rounding out the categories. Things we've seen before. MyTob is a very common one we see. Smoller as well. Suspicious AD, I'm not quite sure. That's a detection I haven't seen before. I'd have to take a closer look at that one, which I didn't get a chance to do. It does account for 9% of all of them, so that might warrant a little more inspection. Here's actual messages. So Dromaden was using a scheme. We saw a bunch of them with his BBB assistance subject with a case number. Not quite sure what. I didn't look at the content of that email. A lot of these, though, we've seen this scheme before. They're enticing you. They're enticing you to say that a photo of you has been placed out on the internet, and you might want to take a look at whatever's inside here. It's not really a photo of you. It's going to install malware on your machine.
Yeah, John, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask a little bit about the Zbot thing.
Okay.
We can digress for a moment. So a little while ago, I think maybe 2 months ago now, Microsoft had cooperated with law enforcement, I believe, or gone through a court order process to seize activity associated with Zeus botnet. I don't recall if it was specifically one. There's certainly a lot of assets, that is, domain names that were associated with that takedown. It sounds like Zeus botnets are alive and well here. I've heard some indications, in fact, that some people have believed that Zeus is sort of in the past.
Oh, I don't think so at all. In fact, you're right. Microsoft did do a pretty big takedown. They took down a lot of domains. Since we've seen the traditional Zeus kind of refilling itself, and we've seen Microsoft react to that. Actually, I was just looking this morning, and I saw a bunch of newer Zeus domains also being sinkholed to the Microsoft IP addresses. Mm-hmm. So they are still in the process of sinkholing newer ones that they find. But, these operators are basically creating new domains, setting up new botnets with the same software. However, what we're also seeing a lot of lately, and I did not confirm if the Zeus stuff that we're seeing in email is this, there's a new version of Zeus out, and, God, the name is escaping me now. Game Over. It's called Game Over, it goes by. It's basically got a peer-to-peer command and control methodology it uses for the bots to update themselves and to steal the passwords from the machines for exfiltrating the stolen passwords. Mm-hmm. That we've seen tremendous amounts of in emails, especially. It'll fish people through an email. We've seen the way that you actually get infected with it when you click on the link in the email. Sends you to a black hole exploit kit webpage, which I think we've talked about in other previous programs, which ultimately is just really a downloader that downloads one of these newer Zeus variants to your machine. So, long story short, Zeus is not dead. In fact, the old stuff is still kind of, refilling, like I said, and this newer variant is really taking off more, the P2P variant that's out there now.
Okay. Thanks for that. I just want to make sure that it's all put in the context there. You did a good job. Thanks.
Okay. There's a couple of package delivery ones, getting back to Gromodon related to that. The suspicious AD one looks like another parcel-based spam, trying to trick you into thinking that maybe a parcel got misdelivered or is, can't be delivered to you, so they're going to try to trick you into opening it. Malaframe, there was only a few of these. I didn't really look at that one. Smaller. Zbot, we saw tons of these Zbot ones. Obviously, they accounted for the majority of the ones that we saw here. Most of them they were in Russian language, which is kind of interesting, but it said returned mail. It had this, I'm not sure what that translates to in Russian, with some digits there. I think it's some kind of maybe another parcel delivery thing or something. And then there's also some purchase order for your company product ones trying to entice you in there. Rounding out MyTab, we've seen a bunch of these MyTab ones as well in the past. This is primarily targeting AT&T.net users. We see a lot of them. They actually pretend to be AT&T, and we're trying to notify you that your account's been suspended. That's not us sending you these emails. That's these bad guys trying to trick you. So watch out for that. But these get blocked we're pretty good at blocking these from ever getting to our customers. So lastly, I wanted to jump into, I mentioned that there was this one spam run that we've seen. We saw a bunch of these, actually, and it was kind of unique, so I wanted to take a closer look at it. It actually is an Arabic-based one, which is kind of unusual. We don't normally see malware targeting Arabic users, especially, in our spam probe accounts. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we have a high percentage of Arabic-speaking users using our service, but don't normally see this, so it kind of raised my interest. What I found in here is the email was sent to a Alabji Lovers news group, Yahoo group, and there are members in here as well as, that's what it was sent to, but I think there's some BCCs in here, and that might be how we got it. In any event, when you actually look, it's all in Arabic. This looks like probably some sort of Islam religious-based email. I couldn't really tell the whole crux of the content. But what caught my eye about it is when you kind of scroll down in this email here, further down, there's all these links to, at the beginning it's links to various religious texts and whatnot, which is fine. But once you get down lower, they had links to executables of different, I'm not even sure what they say in here. I downloaded a few of these, and every one of them were malware of some sort. Actually, I'll jump to that last page. Most of them were of this password stealer LD Pinch, which is it's kind of a generic password stealing detection that's out there. So running any, if you clicked on this and installed it, you would have a password stealing Trojan on your machine that's going to try to steal and exfiltrate all of your passwords that you log into on various websites or on your machine in general. I did have one other page here that kind of just tried to translate some of this because I don't really know that. Obviously, I'm not a native Arabic-speaking user, but it looked like some sort of Islamic library. Didn't translate very well, but just to give you an idea of what some of that text was. And there are a lot of I think this IBN reference here is for international book number or whatever. It was referenced to various books and texts that you could click links on. In any event, that's an interesting one. Don't normally see it, so I kind of wanted to point that out. I don't think many of our users would even know to click on those links, but if they did or you saw that one, that's one to be wary of, as well as any of the other ones that we saw earlier on in our list of email subjects there.
Well, and I can imagine, in many cases, some of these new attempts to exploit victims are experiments in themselves. We've seen a lot of examples like that in the past, and this may in fact be, this is purely conjecture on my part, but it may be an experiment to see how many non-Arabic-speaking users are curious and start clicking around on the email and end up becoming a victim.
Could be. Yeah, like you said, we could speculate. I'm not really sure. A lot of the other ones are a lot easier to figure out. This one I couldn't really figure out the motivation behind, but you could be right there.
Yep. All right, great. Thank you, John. Good report. Next item we'll talk about is the Internet Weather Report, sort of another sort of routine segment of the program here. And just to sort of start out, we have a couple of ports that are rather unusual that showed up. This is UDP destination port 16464 and 16465. We'll take a quick look at those. It's a growth of activity. Doesn't look like it has any security threat associated with it. It looks like peer-to-peer activity. But does not appear to be of great concern, but worth noting that it is a growth of activity. As I mentioned earlier in Jim's segment of the report, we were talking about the RDP exploit that has made it to Megasploit, and I don't know that we have not verified that activity is related to this, but we certainly have a high roller, so to speak, in terms of anomalous activity on port 3389, which is the RDP server port. So we'll take a look at that and see how that's been changing. There are a few others here that we'll take a look at. One that's perhaps notable is activity on port 5060 UDP. That's session initiation protocol for voice over IP. And we're seeing a lot of activity. We've talked about this. I think we talked about it perhaps 2 weeks ago or more, but relatively recently. And this appears to be unconfirmed, but appears to be voice over IP spamming activity. And there are a couple other things we'll talk about. So with that, let's dig into the specifics. First, we'll address the 16434 UDP and 16464 UDP and 16465 UDP. We're showing 30 days of activity and starting right around, well, actually, if we go really dig back, the activity starts way back around, I would say, April 19th, but it starts to grow more significantly right around May 1st. And from that point, we have an increase in the number of participants using these ports, as well as the number of flows or connections associated with these ports. And it has been growing. It's not a significant size, and the characteristics of the behavior do look like they're peer-to-peer activity. So I don't see any security threat associated with this. And incidentally, these ports are associated with, right off of Apple's website, indicates that they are used as a part of Apple Game Server, although it is not, again, I think they're actually registered or perhaps associated with, it's a real-time controller protocol. Forgive me, I don't recall specifically the name of it. But in any case, this would be consistent with peer-to-peer activity. the only notable thing really is the fact that it is new activity and increasing in terms of the number of participants and the level of activity. So we'll keep an eye on that. Next item is this activity. This is a number of sources scanning on port 3389 TCP. We're showing 90 days of activity here because I wanted to sort of highlight the contrast in behavior that's taken place. Now, the most active sources are from the United States, China, Korea, and India. And there's sort of a long tail in terms of the amount of activity that's taken place from specific users or specific IP addresses that are contributing to this activity. And one of the characteristics is that there does seem to be very clearly, and I'll explain in terms of the graph here, but there seems to be clearly two different sets of behavior. One appears to be scanning activity from perhaps infected machines. The other looks like scanning activity that may be more focused, that is, or more purposeful in nature. So with that, we can sort of see that from the graph. That is, there's a period here where there's a significant drop in activity, and then there's still a continuing noise floor of activity. So what is likely the cause of this is a botnet that is basically associated with this scanning activity. That is the sources that are doing the scanning. And we're looking at the number of sources doing scanning here, by the way. And if that botnet were to lose its command and control server, it's likely that we'd see a drop in that behavior. Now, it appeared to have restored for a short period of time around the middle of April, was lost again or perhaps disconnected. That noise floor resumed, and then right around the beginning of May here, on May 1st, it resumed, and actually with more participants involved in that, and it appears to be growing in activity up to this day. So what that suggests is that there is a botnet that's scanning on this activity, and there may be others that are basically have machines that may not be part of a botnet, but they're actually also scanning on this activity. A known worm that is propagating on this, or has been at least in the past associated with this port, is called the mortar worm. We had reported on that sometime late last year. And we also have a lead that is based on the activity that's going on here, an indicator through a correlation analysis that indicates a likely command and control server associated with the botnet activity here. So we'll be investigating that a little bit further, and hopefully we'll be able to do something to shut that down. Next item is scan probes on port 53 TCP. Port 53 TCP is used for DNS. Most DNS activity occurs on 53 UDP, but TCP is used in some circumstances as well. In this particular case, it's relatively sporadic activity, more recently in the last few days here. And the majority of probes are from a single source in China. And that source is also associated with a little bit of scanning activity on port 1024, 1026, and some others. I'm not exactly sure what the association between those might be. There have been ports, actually, I'm not familiar with the applications that use these particular ports, is 1024, 1026, some others like 1032. There were applications that use the UDP version of those ports, and actually we had seen in the past what we call pop-up spam associated with those ports, but I don't have an explanation for this particular activity here. In any case, be on the lookout for scanning activity on port 53 TCP, which may be attempting to identify DNS servers. Next item here is it shows up in our anomalies. This is scan packets that I'm showing here on port 57769 TCP. This is not one of the well-known ports associated with an application. It turns out when we look at the characteristics of this scanning activity, it appears to be backscatter from a denial of service attack. The target appears to be a single address in China. And that's based on the fact that the flows associated with this are showing syntax, indicating that it's a response flow as opposed to initiating a connection. and it is showing a fixed source port of port 80, which would be the target port in terms of the attack. Right? And that is obviously a popular port to attack if you were attacking a web server, for example. There is also sort of some constraints around the address range that's associated with scanning activity, which suggests it's not really scanning, again, possibly associated with spoof port source attack activity and the backscatter associated with it. But I guess the notable item here is this has been continuing since, looks like the latter portion of April 30th, and continuing up to this day, and hopefully that will discontinue soon. Next item here is what I described earlier. We're seeing elevated activity in general on port 5060 UDP. That's Session Initiation Protocol. It's normal to have Session Initiation Protocol on the Internet. There's quite a bit of voice over IP traffic taking place, but we'd expect a little more stability associated with the activity that's taking place. And what we're seeing is sort of a lump that's taking place. And what we're really looking at in this graph, by the way, is the relative change in activity compared to what we'd expect to be normal. So the normal here would be right around 1, using that as a baseline, then kind of drawing in. As you can see, there's certainly a substantial increase over that and some irregularity in that activity. When we take a look at the sources of that activity, there are just a few sources that are creating most of this activity, and they appear to be terminating that at some specific destinations with lots and lots of packets, indicative of perhaps some spamming activity. That is, the sources do not appear to be ones that you would expect to be originating this volume of voice over IP connections. The next item here is scan probes on 5901 TCP. This is a port that's associated with VNC, that's Virtual Network Connection. And basically, this is a remote desktop protocol. And the port that's actually more normally associated with this application is port 5900 TCP. So what I chose to do in this particular case is show the graph of both of those in composite. That is, the red represents the port 5900, the more frequently used port associated with this. And I think the way this works, and perhaps somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way this works is if you have one connection on port 5900, then the alternative or the next port that's used is a 5901, and it can actually sequence up to additional ports as well. So this is, I think, a way to facilitate multiple connections on that VNC server. In any case, what we've seen is some increased scanning activity on port 5901, but we've also seen a sort of a long history of scanning activity, somewhat spurious in nature, but scanning activity on 5900. The most aggressive source doing this scanning is from the Ukraine, and that source is also associated with scanning activity on port 3389 TCP, which is not a surprise. Both of these are basically remote access or remote desktop type applications. There's another source from China, another source from the Czech Republic. So just a few sources doing the scanning, and that's specifically on 5901 that I'm referring to in terms of those sources. Next item is some scanning activity, somewhat spurious, sporadic, I should say, activity on port 1080 TCP. We had reported on this a few weeks ago. There was a bunch of scanning activity that took place between, I think it's April 17th up to April 21st. Relatively slowed down, and then we saw some increased activity again starting on the 9th. That would have been just yesterday, so up into today. And again, it's spurious, not particularly aggressive. The most aggressive source is from the UK. There are other sources that are doing scanning that sort of create this noise floor here in the US, Taiwan, and a variety of other countries too. Now, last week I think Jim Clausing reported on some scanning activity on port 90. we also showed in this last week some anomalous activity on port, I think it was 8090, as well as port 8086, if I remember correctly. In any case, we certainly are seeing increased scanning recently on port 8090, and it turns out that the most aggressive source, is a single source from China. And if we look back, that is also associated with scanning activity on port 90 that had been reported last week. And then looking back 30 days, it's also associated with scanning activity on port 88, port 8086, as well as the others that we mentioned here. So this is, again, I guess what we've loosely called the rainbow chart here. Although we're not really using rainbow colors, it does have a variety of colors and, again, associated with very much similar or the same sources of activity. And then the last two, we have the pie graphs, the routine pie graphs here. This is activity, sort of a composite of what's taken place over the last day or so. The top 10 most probed ports. At the top of the list, as usual, is port 445 TCP. Close followers 1433 TCP. The collection of those two together represent perhaps 40% or so of the total activity. We had talked about port 3389. Port 8080 TCP is being scanned relatively aggressively, as is port 80. We've seen that. Port 22 and port 23 are in the mix as usual, trying to get the remote shell, oftentimes password guessing activity. The port 123 UDP that shows here, as I often report, is not security related. And then we've also seen this port 27977 TCP, and we don't know exactly why that's being probed, but it does. There was some loose connection with TDSS being one of the rootkits out there, so that may be in fact a backdoor port associated with it. That's unconfirmed. And then the last but not least, the top 10 most sources probing, that is the ports that have the most sources probing them. Far and above the others is port 445, which in itself represents probably perhaps 40% of the sources that we see doing this scanning. We already reported on port 23, port 3389. Port 1562 is still being probed. This is what was the P Connect manager, and we've reported that in other weeks as well. There's a little bit of peer-to-peer gaming activity, so we're going to cross that off the list. And then we had also already reported on port 8080 and port 80. So that pretty much covers the list today. And any last comments from the group here? All right, well, we thank you for joining us. And last but not least, I would like to share with you some contact information. As always, we encourage you to contact us. You can reach us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. Through email, we welcome your suggestions, corrections, or suggestions for the program, and we also accept compliments. Also, I want to call your attention that you can view some of our writings from the Networking Exchange blog. That's networkingexchangeblog.att.com. There is a /topics/security section that addresses more specifically security topics. And this program is available on the web at the techchannel.att.com. There's an RSS feed available for the tech channel, and you can select out the cyber threat report if you prefer, but there's other neat stuff on that tech channel. The report is also available from YouTube. Just search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report. It's also available in audio form from iTunes. Just search for the Cyber Threat Report, and as well as FeedBurner. And the link is shown here. It's feeds.feedburner.com/ATT Cyber Threat Report. And with that, I would like to thank John and Jim for joining today. And thank you for joining us today. And please keep your network safe.